The first thing I noticed that afternoon was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles gently over a neighborhood, but the heavy, unnatural quiet that presses against your chest and makes your instincts scream before your mind can catch up. Our HOA neighborhood was usually alive with small sounds. Sprinklers ticking, children laughing, lawnmowers humming in the distance. That day, there was none of it. I remember standing at the edge of my driveway, grocery bags still in my hands, when the faintest hint of smoke drifted across the air. At first, I thought someone was burning leaves even though it wasn't allowed. Then I heard my name being shouted, panicked and raw, and I dropped everything. The treehouse had been there for years. My late husband built it with his own hands, every nail driven with patience and love, high enough to make a child feel brave but sturdy enough to make a parent feel safe. It wasn't just wood and rope. It was memory, comfort, and laughter wrapped together. My daughter loved that treehouse more than anything. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with a shy smile and a fierce imagination. When the world felt too loud or too cruel, she climbed those wooden steps and escaped into stories only she could see. That treehouse had been approved years ago by the HOA, documented and signed off, but none of that mattered to the woman who decided she had the right to rewrite rules when it suited her. Karen had moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier, carrying herself like she owned the streets beneath her feet. She was the kind of HOA enforcer who didn't care about context or compassion, only power. From the moment she arrived, she made it clear that our presence bothered her. Our house, our skin color, our refusal to bow our heads when she spoke. She smiled tightly when others were watching, but when it was just us, her voice sharpened, her words heavy with implication. She complained about the treehouse more times than I could count, calling it unsafe, an eyesore, and once without shame, the kind of structure that attracts the wrong attention. That afternoon, my daughter had been playing up there while I ran a quick errand. She begged me to let her stay. I remember hesitating, feeling that small tug of worry that parents feel without knowing why. But the neighborhood had always been safe, or so I thought. When I heard the shouting, when I smelled the smoke, I ran harder than I ever had in my life. Neighbors stood frozen in their yards, faces pale, eyes wide, all of them staring toward the old oak tree at the back of our property. Flames licked the wooden steps of the treehouse, small at first, then hungry, climbing upward as if guided by intent. Smoke poured out from beneath the platform, thick and dark. And above it all, cutting through the chaos, was my daughter's scream. It wasn't just fear. It was betrayal, confusion, and pain all tangled together. I saw Karen standing near the base of the tree, arms crossed, her phone held up as if she were documenting a victory. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. I screamed my daughter's name and ran forward, but 2 neighbors grabbed me, pulling me back as the fire flared hotter. Someone shouted that the ladder had been removed. Someone else yelled that the fire department was on the way. I could barely hear any of it over the roaring in my ears. My child was trapped above the flames, the only way down cut off, the heat rising toward her small body. I watched her press herself against the railing, coughing, crying, begging for help, while a grown woman stood below and did nothing. Karen's voice cut through the noise, loud and sharp. She said the treehouse was in violation. She said she had warned us. She said this was what happens when people don't follow the rules. I remember thinking with terrifying clarity that this wasn't an accident. This was punishment. She had locked the access gate to the ladder, and later we would learn she had started the fire herself, claiming she was clearing debris. In that moment, all I knew was that my daughter was burning alive while a system that was supposed to protect us stood silent. I dropped to my knees on the grass, screaming until my throat burned. Time stretched and twisted. Every second felt like an hour. The smoke thickened, and my daughter's cries grew weaker. I begged Karen to unlock the ladder, to help, to do anything. She didn't move. She told me to calm down. She told me the authorities would handle it. The cruelty of her calmness was worse than the fire itself. Then, finally, sirens. The sound cut through the neighborhood like a lifeline. Fire trucks roared in, police cars screeching to a halt behind them. Firefighters didn't hesitate. They ran, axes and hoses in hand, moving with purpose and urgency. One of them climbed the tree with nothing but rope and determination, reaching my daughter just as the flames breached the platform. Another smashed the locked gate at the base, the sound of metal snapping echoing like justice cracking open. When they brought my daughter down, wrapped in a blanket, her face streaked with soot and tears, I collapsed beside her. She was alive, shaken, burned, terrified, but alive. A police officer knelt next to me, his voice steady and kind, promising me that what had happened would not be ignored. Across the yard, Karen finally looked afraid. The phone had lowered from her hand. The power she thought she had was slipping away. As the fire was extinguished and the smoke cleared, the truth began to surface. Neighbors spoke up, voices trembling but determined. They talked about threats, about complaints, about comments that crossed lines long before flames ever did. Body cameras recorded everything. Evidence was gathered. And for the first time since Karen moved into our neighborhood, she was the one being told to step aside, to remain silent, to answer questions. That day changed everything. Not just for my family, but for the entire HOA. What started as a woman abusing her authority became a reckoning. One that forced a community to confront how easily power can turn into cruelty when prejudice goes unchecked. As I held my daughter in my arms, feeling her small heartbeat against my chest, I knew this was only the beginning. Justice had arrived in the form of sirens and uniforms, but dignity would take longer to restore. And I promised her, as the sun dipped behind the smoke-stained sky, that no one would ever silence her screams again. The night after the fire felt longer than any I had ever lived through. Hospitals have a way of bending time, stretching minutes into unbearable hours. The antiseptic smell clung to everything, and the soft beeping of machines became a cruel metronome counting the seconds since my daughter's laughter had last sounded carefree. She lay in the hospital bed, her small hand wrapped in gauze, her breathing shallow but steady. The doctors said she was lucky. Lucky. The word echoed bitterly in my head. There was nothing lucky about surviving something that never should have happened in the first place. Police officers came and went quietly, respectful of her rest, taking statements in hushed voices. They asked me to start from the beginning, not just that afternoon but months back. Every complaint, every confrontation, every time Karen had stood a little too close, smiled a little too thinly, spoken a little too slowly, as if explaining rules to someone she believed couldn't possibly understand them. I told them everything. I told them about the emails copied to the HOA board, the warnings written in bold red letters, the way she always framed her hostility as concern for safety, while her eyes said something far uglier. By morning, the story had spread beyond our neighborhood. News vans lined the street outside the hospital, their logos flashing under the harsh white lights. I refused every interview. My daughter didn't need to become a headline. She needed peace, safety, and reassurance that the world wasn't as cruel as it had just shown itself to be. But the attention brought something else with it. Witnesses. Neighbors who had stayed silent before began to speak. They called the police department. They emailed the city. They showed up with written statements, photos, recordings. Fear had kept them quiet before. Now outrage gave them courage. Karen was arrested the next afternoon. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard about it in vivid detail. How she argued. How she insisted she was enforcing HOA regulations. How she claimed the fire was an accident and that my daughter should never have been up there unsupervised. The officers didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Evidence doesn't care how confident you sound when you're lying. The lock on the ladder gate. The accelerant found near the base of the tree. The timestamps on her phone showing messages sent while the fire was already burning. Piece by piece, her story collapsed under its own weight. The HOA board released a statement that evening, full of carefully chosen words and hollow sympathy. They said they were shocked. They said they were reviewing internal processes. They said they did not condone individual actions. Not once did they apologize for empowering someone who had weaponized their authority. Not once did they acknowledge the discrimination complaints that had been ignored. Reading it made my hands shake. I realized then that Karen hadn't acted alone. Not really. She had been enabled by silence, by paperwork, by a system more concerned with property values than people. My daughter woke up crying that night, her body stiff with fear, her voice hoarse from smoke and screaming. She asked me if the fire was coming back. She asked me if she was in trouble. I held her and told her the truth as gently as I could, that she had done nothing wrong, that adults were supposed to protect her, and that some had failed. I promised her that the people who hurt her would be held accountable. It wasn't just a comfort anymore. It was a vow. The arraignment happened 3 days later. Karen stood in court wearing a pale sweater, her hair pulled back neatly, looking every bit the composed HOA official she believed herself to be. She avoided my eyes. The charges were read aloud: reckless endangerment, unlawful restraint, arson, child endangerment. Each word landed like a hammer in the silent courtroom. When the judge denied her immediate release, something shifted in the air. It wasn't triumph. It was gravity. The acknowledgement that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a neighborhood dispute. It was a crime. Social services became involved, not to question my parenting, but to support my daughter's recovery. A counselor came to the hospital room, speaking softly, explaining feelings and fear in ways a child could understand. She drew pictures instead of answering questions, her crayons pressing hard into the paper when the flames appeared. Watching her relive it in color and shape broke something open inside me. Anger replaced fear. Not wild, reckless anger, but focused, determined resolve. The city launched an independent investigation into the HOA. Emails surfaced showing Karen had been warned repeatedly about her behavior. Complaints had been logged, then quietly closed. One message from a board member stood out, chilling in its casual dismissal. She's strict, but she keeps things in order. Order. As if cruelty were a reasonable price to pay for neat lawns and matching mailboxes. Neighbors began stopping by our house, leaving meals, flowers, handwritten notes. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Others admitted they had been afraid of retaliation. I didn't judge them. Fear thrives in environments where power goes unchecked. But I told them this silence almost killed my child. And silence would not protect anyone ever again. My daughter was discharged a week later. She moved carefully, flinching at sudden noises, refusing to sleep unless the lights were on. The treehouse was gone, reduced to ash and charred wood, the oak tree scarred but standing. The city fenced off the area, declaring it part of an active investigation. For now, it was a wound left open, impossible to ignore. Karen's defense attorney tried to paint her as misunderstood, overwhelmed, overzealous. They said she had only wanted compliance. They said there was no proof she knew my daughter was trapped. That argument fell apart the moment the body camera footage was played, capturing my screams, my daughter's cries, and Karen's calm voice stating she would not unlock the gate because it was against HOA policy. Policy. The word felt obscene in that context. As weeks passed, the case gained national attention. Advocacy groups reached out, offering legal support and counseling resources. They spoke about patterns, about how HOA power had been used to target families who didn't fit a certain mold. Our story was no longer isolated. It was part of something larger, something long ignored. One evening, my daughter asked me if she would ever be brave again. The question stopped me cold. I told her bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up even when fear tries to take your voice. I told her she was the bravest person I knew. She nodded slowly, considering it, then asked if the police would make sure it never happened again. I told her they were trying, and so was I. The preliminary hearing ended with the judge setting a trial date and ordering Karen held without bond due to the severity of the charges. When the gavel struck, it echoed like a promise. Justice, slow and imperfect, was moving forward. But the hardest part was still ahead. Healing isn't linear. Justice doesn't erase trauma. And dignity, once violated, must be reclaimed piece by piece. As I tucked my daughter into bed that night, her scarred hand curled around mine. I knew the fight was no longer just about what had been taken from us. It was about what we would refuse to lose, our voice, our pride, and our right to exist without fear in a place we called home. And this time we would not stand alone. The trial began under a gray sky, the kind that feels heavy with unfinished business. By then, my daughter had learned the courthouse hallways by heart, though she never once stepped inside the courtroom itself. The judge ruled she would not be required to testify unless absolutely necessary, and I silently thanked every power that existed for that mercy. Still, she felt it. Children always do. She sensed the tension in my shoulders, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, the way adults spoke her name like it was made of glass. Inside the courtroom, Karen looked smaller than she ever had in the neighborhood, though nothing about her posture suggested remorse. She sat straight-backed beside her attorney, hands folded, expression carefully neutral. The prosecution laid out the case methodically, without theatrics, letting facts speak where outrage could have easily taken over. They presented the fire marshal's report first. Accelerant, deliberate ignition point, no natural cause, no accident. The words landed one by one, stripping away the last excuse she had tried to cling to. Then came the recordings. Emails printed large on poster boards. HOA violation notices issued outside proper authority. Messages where she bragged about teaching people a lesson and setting an example before the board lost control of the neighborhood. The courtroom grew quiet in a way that felt almost reverent, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing the unmasking of something ugly that had hidden behind politeness and procedure. When the body camera footage played, I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at Karen. I listened instead. My own voice sounded unfamiliar, raw, broken, pleading. My daughter's screams echoed through the speakers, and more than one juror wiped their eyes. Karen stared straight ahead, jaw tight, unmoving. Not once did she turn around. Her attorney tried to shift the narrative. They spoke about stress, about overreach, about a woman who had taken her role too seriously. They suggested cultural misunderstandings, claimed my complaints were exaggerated, implied that emotions had clouded judgment on all sides. But there are some moments you can't talk your way out of. There are some truths that refuse to be softened. A neighbor took the stand next, a man who had lived on our street for over 20 years. His voice shook as he described watching the fire start and realizing the ladder had been locked. He admitted he had hesitated before calling out, unsure if it was his place. That admission hung in the air longer than anything else. Not just what Karen had done, but what fear had allowed her to do. Another neighbor followed. Then another. Patterns emerged. Targeted warnings. Selective enforcement. Language that danced around prejudice without ever naming it outright. The prosecution didn't need to say the word discrimination. Everyone in that room understood it. The HOA board members were subpoenaed. One by one, they took the stand, uncomfortable under oath, forced to explain why complaints had been dismissed, why Karen had been given so much unchecked authority, why no one intervened when lines were clearly crossed. Some tried to distance themselves. Others blamed bureaucracy. One finally said what everyone else avoided, that confronting her would have been more trouble than it was worth. That was the moment something broke open in me. My daughter's life had been weighed against inconvenience, and inconvenience had nearly won. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered every day. Advocacy groups stood beside us, holding signs not just with my daughter's name, but with dozens of others. Stories of families harassed, threatened, displaced by HOAs that forgot they existed to serve people, not control them. What happened to us had ignited something far beyond our street. At home, my daughter began therapy twice a week. Progress came in small, uneven steps. Some days she laughed again. Other days, the smell of smoke from a neighbor's grill sent her into shaking silence. I learned how to sit with her fear instead of rushing it away. Healing demanded patience, and love demanded presence. Halfway through the trial, the judge ruled that the HOA could be named as a civil defendant in a separate proceeding. The decision rippled through the courtroom. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one woman. It was about systems, accountability, responsibility. The board's attorney requested a recess, their confidence visibly shaken for the first time. Karen took the stand near the end. She spoke calmly, choosing words with care, presenting herself as misunderstood, as someone who had lost control of a situation. But under cross-examination, cracks formed. She admitted she knew my daughter was in the treehouse. She admitted she had locked the gate earlier that day to prevent access. She admitted she did not attempt to unlock it once the fire started because it would have violated protocol. Protocol. Again. When the prosecution asked her if any protocol was worth a child's life, the courtroom went completely still. She didn't answer right away. And in that pause, everything she stood for, became painfully clear. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting that felt endless. I held my daughter's hand in the hallway when the call finally came. She squeezed back, tighter than I expected, as if she understood what was at stake. The verdict was read slowly. Guilty. On every major count. The sound that left my chest wasn't a cheer or a sob. It was something quieter. Release. Karen slumped slightly, the first real sign of collapse I had seen from her. The judge ordered her remanded into custody pending sentencing, citing lack of remorse and extreme danger to the community. But justice didn't stop there. Within weeks, the HOA board resigned en masse. The city appointed an interim administrator. Policies were rewritten. Oversight committees formed. Mandatory training instituted. It was too late for what had happened to us, but it mattered for what could be prevented next. One evening, months after the fire, my daughter stood in our backyard, staring at the old oak tree. The city had removed the fence. The ground had been cleared, the scars still visible but no longer hidden. She asked me if we could build something new there one day. Not a treehouse, she said. Something different. I smiled and told her yes, when she was ready, because dignity isn't about pretending nothing was lost. It's about choosing what rises in its place. And as the sun set behind that scarred but standing tree, I knew the story, our story, was no longer just about surviving cruelty. It was about transforming it into something that could never be ignored again. The sentencing came on a quiet morning, almost deceptively calm for a day that would close a chapter written in fire and fear. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel grounded, present, unshakable. My daughter stayed home with her counselor, a decision we made together. She had carried enough weight already. Justice didn't require her to carry more. The courtroom filled slowly. Karen entered in handcuffs this time, no longer buffered by authority or the illusion of control. She looked older, diminished, her confidence replaced by something brittle. The judge reviewed the facts again, not for the jury now, but for the record, for history. Reckless endangerment, arson, unlawful restraint, child endangerment. Each count stood on its own, solid and undeniable. When the judge spoke about the deliberate misuse of power, about the cruelty of prioritizing protocol over human life, I felt a tightness loosen in my chest. The harm had been named, out loud, in a room that mattered. Victim impact statements followed. I stood when it was my turn, my hands steady despite the tremor in my voice. I spoke about the night my daughter woke screaming because she smelled smoke in a dream, about the way she flinched when she heard keys jingle, afraid someone might lock something again, about the dignity stolen when a child is made to believe her safety is conditional. I spoke about a community that learned, too late, the cost of silence. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I told the truth and I let it breathe. Karen declined to speak. Her attorney offered a brief statement about remorse conveyed privately, about lessons learned. The judge nodded, but the expression didn't change. Accountability, it turned out, wasn't interested in careful phrasing. The sentence was handed down with clarity and finality. Years of incarceration, followed by probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership role within the state. The gavel struck once, clean and loud. That sound, more than anything, felt like the end of an echo that had been bouncing around my life for months. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. Reporters gathered, but I spoke only briefly. I thanked first responders. I thanked neighbors who came forward. I reminded everyone listening that this wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, about the line that should never be crossed when power meets prejudice. Then I took a breath and went home. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It never does. But it began to show itself in small, unmistakable ways. My daughter started sleeping with the lights off again. She laughed without checking my face first. She asked questions about firefighters and how they learned to climb so fast. We practiced grounding exercises together when the world felt too loud. We learned that courage isn't something you summon on command. It's something you grow, slowly, in safe soil. The civil case against the HOA moved forward with less drama and more consequence. Settlements were reached, funds earmarked for trauma services and independent oversight. New bylaws required transparency, community review boards, and rotating leadership. Mandatory anti-bias training became a condition of service. The neighborhood changed not overnight, but meaningfully. It became a place where concerns were documented and addressed, where rules had context, where humanity came first. One afternoon, a city worker knocked on our door with a proposal. Community space, something restorative, a place for children to climb and imagine without fear. My daughter listened quietly, then surprised everyone by speaking up. She didn't want another treehouse, she said. She wanted a platform, low to the ground, open, somewhere anyone could sit and tell stories, somewhere no one could be trapped. We built it together that spring. Neighbors volunteered. The old oak tree shaded the space, its scars softened by time and care. On opening day, children chalked the pavement with bright colors and wrote words they liked. Brave, kind, safe. My daughter stood beside me, holding a ribbon, her hands steady. When she cut it, the crowd clapped, but she didn't flinch. She smiled. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, she climbed onto the platform and sat cross-legged, telling a story she made up on the spot. It was about a girl who got stuck in a storm and learned she could ask for help without being ashamed. People listened. Adults, children, strangers. The sound of her voice carried across the yard, clear and strong. That was when I understood what justice had given us. Not a return to what we had lost, but the freedom to choose what came next. Pride, reclaimed not through anger, but through presence. Dignity, restored not by erasing pain, but by honoring it and moving forward anyway. We still talk about that day. We don't hide it. We don't let it define us either. It's a chapter, not the book. And when new neighbors move in, when questions come up about rules and rights, our community remembers. We remember that safety isn't a privilege granted by authority. It's a promise we keep to one another. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, my daughter and I sit beneath the oak tree and listen to the neighborhood sounds return. Laughter, footsteps, the gentle rhythm of ordinary life. She leans against me and says she feels safe. And I believe her, because justice arrived in time, not just in sirens and sentences, but in the courage to change. And dignity stayed, rooted deep, stronger than fear, ready to grow wherever it's given room.